I on? Okay, well, they brought another chair up, so I'm going to do this a little bit differently. Normally you would sit down here, read it, but if I sit too close to her and I say something she doesn't like, I'll get, So I just had 2 hernia surgeries, so a hit to the gut, probably not a good idea. So my name is Dan. I'm a grateful believer in Jesus Christ who struggled with lust, inferiority complex, and self-doubt. This is my lovely wife, Renee, also a grateful believer in Jesus Christ who struggles with Parkinson's disease and bouts of depression brought on by Parkinson's. A quick background on me. I'm a 23-year Air Force veteran. Thank you. Currently, I still work for the Air Force out of Grissom. I'm the Cyber Operations Director at Grissom Air Force Base, which is a fancy way of saying I supervise a lot of very intelligent people. My mom was invited to Olive Branch when it was an old church over there. I should have a slide of that, the first slide. That's a picture, it's up there. That's a picture I painted a couple years ago of the old Olive Branch church. I don't know if you can see it real close, but there's outhouses on both sides. And we used those outhouses to the mid-70s until when we moved in here. Except for the ladies, I don't think they liked it. The kids and men didn't care, but I don't think the ladies liked it too much. The church grew very fast in those days, partly because of a bus ministry that the church started. In fact, Renee was one of the first bus kids. The bus drivers were a wonderful couple named Ted and Ruth Hamilton, and a few of the people should know them. They lived in North Manchester, and Ruthie was a friend of Renee's family. So she asked Renee's mom, Bobby, if she could take the kids to church on the church bus. Bobby she didn't care as long as you can get them up on Sunday morning. The bus stopped by a couple times, honked a horn. Bobby just waved them by because they weren't up yet. But Ruthie was a little bit nuts. Okay, so they came early one day, and Ruthie came up to the door and asked Bobby if she could just go get the kids up. So she said, sure. So Ruthie went storming up the stairs and barging into Renee and Teresa's room and said, get up, you're going to church. And of course they protested and said they didn't have anything to wear. Now this is exactly how Renee told me to tell it. She goes over to the closet and does this. Wear these, that's okay. So that's how Renee started coming to church, and I have Ted and Ruth Hamilton to thank for that. I was saved at age 14 at a revival at the old church while this church was being built. I'd gone up forward with a bunch of the kids at church camp and said the words, and I just don't think it meant anything to me or something, but at that revival, it had something to do with that evangelist. It just hit me. As later, I was baptized in a pond in March. So those that complain about the water being cold in a baptismal, I don't want to hear it. So, I went to church camp every chance I got. In fact, Renee and I's first date was at church camp. At Bear Lake Camp, which is north of Columbus City, during the senior high camp, there was a banquet on Friday nights at that time. And we were really kind of expected to take a date. In fact, one year, all the guys were kind of brought together and given a class on how to be a gentleman. And, how to properly escort a lady to a formal dance, arm in arm, hold her chair, hold her door, stuff like that. Something I don't think is taught near enough today. But you have to understand, I was exceptionally shy. And so, the idea of asking anybody to the dance was going to be, So when we got there, Renee doesn't normally go into church camp. She did this year. And she told my sisters that she wanted me to take her to the banquet. Well, now I knew the answer was yes. But I still couldn't do it. I didn't have the courage. And of course, I knew who she was. She was in a youth group. In fact, she even dated my brother a couple times. So... And I often say she was the best hand-me-down my brother ever gave me. But she was the opposite of me. She was athletic and outgoing, and of course she was beautiful, so I think I was a little bit intimidated. Until one day we were playing softball. We were on opposite teams. Renee gets up to bat, and what does a teenage boy do when they know a girl likes them, right? You start making fun of them. That's just what we do, right? We're kind of stupid that way. From the safety of right field, I can heckle her pretty well. And so I'm out in right field, and so I started saying things like, she can't hit. Everybody move up. She's just a girl. I know. What I didn't know about Renee is she'd been playing softball almost since she could walk. So she gets up, and I have to tell you, I mean, from right field, you have to understand it's the 70s, so the gym shorts are a little short, and so I'm watching her, and I'm going, huh. So she gets out in her stance, and from right field, no kidding, I could see the muscles in her arm ripple. And then those long, tan, beautiful legs, I went, wow. And about that time, she hit the ball over my head, so she gets a double or a triple out of it or something, but now I'm hooked. Anyway, we went to the banquet, had a great time. We dated for about 6 months, and then she broke up with me. And then about 6 months later, around July or so, while we were broken up, it was my senior year. I enlisted in the Air Force in a delayed enlistment program, and my report date of August of 1980. We got back together in July of 1980. And then I left a month later for basic training, and she got me through basic training. That's all she was all I could think about. And then on to Denver, Colorado, where I had my tech school. And we eventually were married in May of 1982 in the theater. There's our wedding picture right there. And Ashley said she really... So after we got married, I took my beautiful bride to the honeymoon capital of the world, Clovis, New Mexico. Anybody know where that's at? Any Air Force people on here? It's Cannon Air Force Base, the absolute armpit of the Air Force. But we were newlyweds, so we didn't care. So we were there about 8 months. But after 8 months, I got orders to RAF Upper Heyford, England. I had to find a house before I could bring her over, and the next picture is a house I found. It's a 300-year-old stone cottage, complete with ghosts, so that was fun. But we loved England. We basically honeymooned for 3 years. We had our first anniversary in Paris, the next picture, and a second anniversary in London. So that's we're on top of the Arc de Triomphe overlooking Paris. That was our first anniversary. This as a side, guys, if you get married, don't take your wife to Paris for the first time, because everything else is downhill from there. You really can't top that. One of the things I started doing in England was playing Dungeons and Dragons. My best friend, who's my best friend still today, he just called me this morning. His name is Ronald. He lives in Salt Lake City, but he invited me to play. Now, he was the exact opposite of me. He was an outgoing, extrovert, ambitious, outspoken people person and ladies man. And he was a little bit nuts, but that kind of helps. And we, like I said, we're best friends still today, 30 plus years later. D&D sort of fit in my love for castles and medieval lore, and let's face it, I was in England. That's medieval central, right? So at first, it was just an inexpensive way to pass the time. But as I got better and more comfortable with the game, I wanted to be a dungeon master. And if you've ever played it, or if you watch Big Bang Theory on TV and watch them play it, it's all in the imagination. And it's all based on what the DM says, the dungeon master says. But I even developed my own world and all this other stuff. And I was told I was pretty good at being a DM. I could tell a story and describe an adventure and sometimes react with imagination with some pretty bizarre questions the players would ask. I'm not going to get into how the good or bad, mostly bad, that D&D is, but I can tell you to help me bring me out of my shell. I was able to control a game. I one time DM'd a game, had 15 people, we played for 15 hours. That skill would come in handy later in life. Our son Daniel was born in England, was 5 months old when we left. My next duty assignment was Mountain Home Air Force Base, Idaho. I loved Idaho. You can basically hunt almost every game animal available in the U.S. I focused on bird hunting. I loved the duck hunt, and I loved the goose hunt. There was pheasants, and chucker partridge is basically rock climbing with a shotgun in your hand. That's a blast, let me tell you. There was quail and grouse of all kinds. I learned to fly fish. That's a picture of me holding my son while I'm trying to fly fish. And we loved camping in Idaho because that place there is not even a campground. It's just a wide spot on the creek that somebody built a fire ring in. And it's all public land for the most part, and you can just, if it's open, you can camp there. And so it was just a wonderful place to be. I loved it. But to add to everything, I was hunting, fishing, and all that other stuff. Of course, I was trying to work, 40 plus hours a week while I was doing all that. But I also found a group of guys to play D&D with. Renee found a job at a convenience store right off base, but we chose to work opposite shifts so we didn't have to pay babysitting. So between the hunting, fishing, and everything else, and then D&D every Sunday and all that stuff, we didn't see each other very much. Every now and then, though, Renee would say, do you really have to go hunting this weekend? So anybody that's married a while, what should be the answer to that question? No. So, no, dear, what would you like to do is what I usually said. So we would go camping together or do something fun or go down to Salt Lake City, visit my friend Ronald or something. But this lack of time together put a huge stress on our marriage. But the Air Force would fix it by sending me away for a week or two. And since absence most of the time makes the heart grow fonder, we would make up when I got back and our lives would go on. Our daughter Alicia was born in Idaho. She is also a miracle of God. During labor, the umbilical cord got wrapped around her neck twice, while Renee pushed for 2.5 hours. Her heart rate dropped to below 30 about every contraction for 2.5 hours. Finally, when she was born, the doctor had to cut the cord twice because it was so embedded in her neck. She was blue as a Smurf. I often used to call her Smurfette, and had to be taken straight to an oxygen tent. Through the grace of God, she didn't suffer any ill effects. And today, she's that woman running around here with a camera. Most of the time, most of you know her. About that time, a bank called Seattle First sent Renee a $5,000 limit credit card, pre-approved, $5,000. In 1988, $5,000 is a lot of money. It's a lot of money now. And so with a note, this is the best part, a note that says, housewives need credit too. What housewife in the world needs $5,000 credit card? Real. Certainly not now. In 1988, that was crazy. We quickly maxed that card out. We had a maxed out Sears card, a couple other credit cards, and 2 car payments. Well, in the Air Force, your income's kind of limited. It's preset. You know, I was an E5 by then. I was just, you're not going to get a promotion, or not going to get a pay raise unless you get a promotion. She already worked 40-plus hours a week, and we were working opposite shifts for a reason, so I couldn't go get another job because I didn't want to have to pay babysitting because I couldn't afford it anyway. So I started looking into paper for things to do at home, assemble products at home or something like that. Well, out of the blue, a friend of mine called me up and said, come on over to my house. I want to show you a business opportunity. We went and saw the Amway business. This seemed to be exactly what I was looking for. So we joined an organization of Amway business owners called Worldwide Dream Builders. I soon found out there was a group of Christian men and women that taught not only the leadership in business, but in your home and most importantly in your spiritual life. Now, this was not the gospel of prosperity. We were taught to put God first in everything, and then everything else will fall in place. This is the first time I actually heard of the vertical alignment, God, wife, family, country, job, and et cetera. I didn't always follow that, and most of the time I didn't. That's probably why I wasn't very successful. But Fight Club kind of teaches that kind of stuff today, too. And Worldwide Dream Builders also exposed me to books and leadership training and seminars by the likes of John Maxwell, Zig Ziglar, that kind of stuff. And I read everything that John Maxwell put out just about. Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People. I became an avid student of leadership and studied books that would help me improve my self-esteem and people skills. We were doing well in the business, and then the first Gulf War hit in 1990. Desert Shield, and then on to Desert Storm. I didn't deploy because by this time I was a dorm manager. I was working in the dorms, but I saw most of my friends and residents of my dorms deploy. Then once the war was over, I saw the results of them coming home. As a dorm manager, I remember having to find rooms for married friends of mine whose wives had left them. One of them in particular came home to an empty house with a note on the door that says, I want a divorce. He didn't know. He had no clue. This really shook me. It really did. My enlistment was coming up in June of 1991, and my business was doing well, and then I'd heard that the aircraft that I worked on, which was the F-111, which has been retired since 95, but still, it was going to be moving down to Cannon Air Force Base, and I was not going back to that hole. There's just no way. So we had decided to make the decision to get off active duty. Being in the Amway business gave me the courage to leave active duty because I felt sure that I would just have to work for a few years and then retire and do Amway full time. I originally wanted to stay in Idaho because that's where the majority of my business was. My friend Ronald in Salt Lake City was in. It was expanding into Salt Lake City, and we were excited about that. And plus, I just love Idaho. I mean, just the mountains were just beautiful. And so I applied. I did a resume and applied all over Boise. Boise's a beautiful city. I wanted to stay there. But I didn't get any takers. So in April of '91, I came home to Indiana here for my sister Dina's wedding. And while on our way home, we got into the green of the Midwest, and Renee says, "Can't we just come home?" Renee did get a job at Butterballs, and then eventually, because the only thing I could find was Pike Lumber Company, which I worked at as a kid. I joined the Air Force Reserves out at Grissom at that time, and in December of '91, I got a full-time job as an Air Reserve technician working avionics on the A-10. Then we bought a house in Chilai, and life was going great. I was still working our business. I had a few clients. We were going to Toledo and Chicago and things like that to seminars, and life was good. Then in 1994, our lives turned upside down. The unit I worked for was BRACT, or basically realignment and closure, was shut down. The A-10 unit was shut down. And I was rifted, which stands for reduction in force, to the communications squadron as a communications security accountant, but with half the pay grade. Also that year, Renee was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. But God, of course, had all this in hand. You see, I never really noticed how God had planned all this out until I started putting this talk together. And I think last round of Fight Club, we were kind of asked to look at our story and see how God worked. I was a shy introvert with low self-esteem and an inferiority complex. But God used a good friend and a game like D&D of all things to bring me out of my shell and give me the ability to talk to people, which led to being successful enough in the Amway business to give me the courage to get off active duty and come home. See, of course, God knew that Renee would be diagnosed with Parkinson's 3 years later. I can't even imagine how tough it would have been on her, on me, the kids, if we'd have still been active duty during the worst of her time with Parkinson's, as you'll see. God says in his word in Jeremiah 29:11, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for welfare and not for evil, to give you a future and a hope." Now, Renee has always been strong and stubborn, so she was not going to let this thing defeat her. So naturally, when her uncle asked her to go on an Alaskan caribou hunt in 1997, she said yes. There's a picture of her with her .308 rifle and her caribou. During that trip, though, she got the big game hunting fever. And if anybody's taken a big game animal, you know what I mean. So her and her uncle started talking and planning an Alaskan spring bear hunt the next year. She was so excited, and although I was a little worried, I mean, she got home and that's all she could talk about. It was like looking up on the internet. We're gonna kill this thing, right? I was a little worried, a little apprehensive, but this could be the adventure of a lifetime, and maybe the only time she'll be able to do this, and yeah, it certainly was. Now, May in the Prince William Sound wilderness area is generally the wettest time of the year, and so it rained the whole time they were there. What she's got on right now is the Air Force Gore-Tex parka, so she went ahead and took that, the whole thing, the parka and parka pants, and she was dry, but I don't have the time to get into everything that went wrong that first week. So a combination of the weather, frustration, and homesickness finally caused Renee to want to find a way to get home. So she thought she could use the old 1998 Nokia brick phone. They're about that big, She thought maybe she could get a hold of her outfitters, but obviously there's no signal out there in the wilderness. But since they're along the Prince William Sound shore, the shipping lanes, maybe they stuck some cell phone towers on an island or something. So all she had to do was get higher. So she left camp by herself to go to the top of the nearest ridge. She left camp without a weapon, food, water, a compass, and most importantly, without her medicine. It was just going to be a quick hike up the mountain, right? Try to make a phone call, hike back down, no big deal. And that's how it went until she got back down to camp and noticed that her cell phone had fallen off her belt. So she turns around and starts looking for the cell phone with her head down. If anybody's ever been in the deep woods, keeping your bearings is all important. And now there's no sun because it's cloudy, and she's got her head down, looking at landmarks or nothing, so eventually she gets lost. But then she panicked at first, of course, as anybody would, but her strength and stubbornness kicked in, and she figured out that as long as she kept along the ocean, or kept the ocean in view, she'd probably find a camp because they were camped along the shoreline. The problem really started when her medicine began to wear off. You see, by this time in her Parkinson's, she couldn't walk across a flat surface without falling. Now she had to worry about rocks and roots and underbrush and uneven ground and all that kind of stuff. So she told me that she would fall, crawl to a tree, pull herself up, push herself off, only to fall a few yards later. And do that all over again, over and over and over for 19 hours. Through the night, until the next morning, early in the morning came, she was exhausted, battered, bruised, and starting to give up hope that she would ever get home. She sat down and leaned up against a tree and covered her legs with some loose moss that they have in Alaska and nearly fell asleep, but she knew if she fell asleep, she'd probably never wake up. She remembered Alicia at the airport saying, "Please, Mommy, don't go." That gave her the desire to get home. She wanted, give her extra desire to get home, but her body wouldn't cooperate. So she prayed, "God, I need to get home to my family, but I can't do it on my own." This is a great lesson for all of us. I did this 5 times and I didn't cry by myself when I was doing it. Anyway, but God gave Renee the strength to stand up one more time, push off from that tree. She said she looked at her watch and it was 6 a.m. She told me she didn't remember a thing until she heard her cousin holler at her dad and say, "Look, Renee, look, Dad, there's Renee," as she walked into camp. She looked at her watch and it was 7. God had gotten her home. A verse Renee and I stand by is Philippians 4:12-13. "I know how to be brought low and I know how to abound. In any and every circumstance, I have learned the secret of facing plenty and hunger, abundance and need. I can do all things through him who strengthens me." As you can imagine, Renee lost her big game hunting bug. From then on, Parkinson's really took its toll, not only on Renee, but on the whole family. By the year 2000, she was falling a lot, and the constant erratic motions known as dyskinesia caused multiple injuries, including broken toes and broken fingers, and caused her to lose a lot of weight, which may seem good, but not like she was. Then by the spring of 2001, her end-of-day dyskinesia was getting so bad that she would often say that she looked like a fish out of water flopping around on the floor, and that's exactly what she looked like. You have to try to imagine every muscle in your body doing its own thing all at the same time at full speed. That's what she was going through for 15 minutes to 4 hours at a time, every night. I jokingly called it her involuntary aerobics because by July of 2001, she was down to under 100 pounds. And she was ripped. Let me tell you, I watched her do setups for 2.5 hours one time. Involuntarily 2.5 hours, but she did setups. She had a 6-pack, but she didn't have any fat on her, and it was killing her. Finally, I said they had transferred her case to the IU Med Center and Movement Disorder Specialist Clinic in Indianapolis. The day of her first appointment was another God moment. It was August of 2001. You have to understand that Parkinson's patients generally won't go outside the house unless they're moving well. And she didn't even like going to see the doctor unless she was moving well. I'm thinking, you should be looking bad when you go see the doctor so you can see how bad it is. Well, we didn't sure where the office was and stuff, so we got there about an hour early, and so it was time for her to take her meds, and she used to take a handful of 16 meds 4 times a day. They never took effect. Now, here's a real God moment. We were called in a half hour early at a busy doctor's office in Indianapolis. When does that ever happen, So the doctor was able to see Renee's dyskinesia not at its worst, but it's bad enough for him to say that it's the worst he'd ever seen. And I told him, well, wait till the night, about 6 o'clock, it'll be 10 times as worse, 10 times as bad. After his initial examination, he asked if we ever heard of the deep brain stimulation surgery, and I said, that's why we're here. That's what we want. So over the next month, she went through a barrage of tests, which she passed with flying colors, and so her surgery was scheduled for October 31st, Halloween Day, 2001. However, we all know what happened on September 11th, 2001. I was still in the Air Force Reserves, and I got a phone call in my office, my civilian office, and he said, report tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock with your extreme cold weather gear. You've been activated. That's not a phone call anybody should get. I mean, The activated part was bad enough, but extreme cold weather gear, I'm like, I thought we were fighting in the desert. What's up with that? But Renee's surgery was a little over a month and a half away. So I went and talked to my commander, and I had to pose the question: does the base need their only communication security and computer security manager in a time of war, which the first attack is going to be cyber anyway, or do you need just another avionics technician? Well, she said, well, I'll go make some phone calls, and she made a couple calls, and she said, well, you're still activated, but you're not on a deployment list, but you still have to show up for work, but you're going to stay here for now. So I went home and packed my bags. I did pack my extreme cold weather gear because I've been in the Air Force long enough to know that things could change. The next morning, we all got up, and I can tell you there's nothing like having your 15-year-old son pray for you before you possibly have to go out for war. By the grace of God, I did not deploy, but I was still activated and had to go to work on the planes. The problem was I was still the only person that can do the computer and communication security job. So I did both. I worked 12, 14, 16 hours a day for 3 weeks straight. I know that's nothing compared to the guys that are doing that's what they're working over there now, but that's what I had to do. And I had to take care of her and the kids and everything else. Then my first day off was a Friday, and I called in to do a communications problem. And I was able to talk to our boss, big boss, the wing commander, and tell him about Renee's surgery. He said he knew all about it, and that I wasn't going anywhere. That next week, I was deactivated and taken off of orders, so now I'm back to just my civilian job, and now we're just waiting on October 31st. The day before her surgery came, and I was busy at my office at work trying to tie up some loose ends because I knew I would be off for a couple weeks. And then I got a call from our son saying, Mom has fallen and cut her face. So I rushed home and found Renee with a cut cheek that went almost all the way through. You see, Renee had arranged for a beautician friend of hers in North Manchester to cut all of her hair off nice and even. The beautician said that the doctors would just chop her hair up and that she would not cut it off neat so it would grow back nice. So Renee decided that before a beautician cuts all of her hair off, that she needed to wash it. Now that's got to be a woman thing. I don't think guys would care. Would we care? I wouldn't care. But she thought, okay, well, she's going to wash her hair in the sink, which she did, a kitchen sink, which she did often. But now you have to understand, she hadn't been able to walk across the kitchen without her walker in months. Well, this day, she thought she could. And when a Parkinson's patient starts to stumble forward, the feet automatically try to catch up so they start to run. So she was running across the kitchen, tripped and fell into some key hooks that were by the back door. Cut her face, like I said, almost all the way through. She ended up with 11 stitches in her face. We took her to the Wabash emergency room, and that doctor did an amazing job of sewing up her face. You can't even tell it. But you have to understand, like most Parkinson's patients, her head did this all the time. So how's he going to sew that? What he did was make her twiddle her thumbs for each stitch. As soon as you started twiddling her thumbs, her head would stop, he'd put a stitch in. And then you had to go back and do the same thing for 11 times. So it took 3.5 hours to put 11 stitches in. So the time we got out of there, it was 8:30, 9 o'clock, so I told that beautician, I called the beautician up in Manchester, and I told him, I told her what happened. I'm like, you know what? It's late. I got a hotel room down in Indy. We got to be at the hospital at 6 o'clock in the morning. We'll just take our chances with the doctor. She said, no, you won't. You will bring her up here right now. I'll open my shop. I know how to obey orders. Okay, so after a trip to North Manchester to get her hair all cut off and a drive to Indy, it was after midnight by the time we got down there. Like I said, we had to be at the hospital at 6. And Renee looked a mess. It's hard to imagine. I didn't take a camera. I wish I had it. But you see, by this time, she was all of 93 pounds. She looked anorexic. Earlier in the week, though, her dyskinesia episodes got so violent that she kicked herself in the eye with her knee. So she had a black eye. She had a cut face. She was bald. Okay, so what does my wonderful wife say when the nurse asks her what happened? See, she's laughing already. She knows what's coming. The nurse asks what happened. She says, my husband beats me. It's a wonder I wasn't taken straight to jail. Luckily, we've been working with this nurse for quite a while. She understood Renee's spunk and sense of humor, so they did not call the police. However, I was not amused. By the time they screwed that metal halo on her head, which is what they attach all the instruments to and stuff, she really looked crazy. She even said so. She said, it's Halloween. Let's go trick-or-treating. I want some Smarties and Tootsie Rolls. The first surgery took about 7.5 hours, and that's when they put the electrodes in her brain, and she's awake during that whole time, just for your information. It was a fantastic success, and we did have one of our former pastors, Lawrence C., was there, was praying for her. My mom, Renee's sister Teresa, and my sister Liz were all there. The next day she was supposed to heal. So Teresa and I went to spend the night at their brother's house in Greenfield. The next morning we did stop by and get her some Smartings Tootsie Rolls. Next surgery, the following day, the surgery was to put in, they're called pulse generators underneath her collarbone. She has wires that run up her head to them. That surgery was also a great success. And then the following day was a Saturday. She was able to come home. It took about till February for her brain to heal enough to get it all the devices turned on. And we call it turning her brain on. And then as we go get them programmed, we call it turning her brain up, which I wish I could do sometimes. Anyways, but she got that turned on, and she basically started running right after that. She went full speed after that. We call this her DBS miracle, because most Parkinson's patients can only go off of their Parkinson's medication for a couple months. Renee went off of all Parkinson's medication for 4.5 years. And even now, she's only on one medication 3 times a day. Our life has finally settled down now. I retired from the Air Force Reserves in 2003. And what I thought was a bad thing back in 1994 when I got rifted, through the leadership training I received from this church, Worldwide Dream Builders, and the Air Force, God has blessed me with several promotions. Now I'm a GS-12 supervisor. And I plan to retire in 3 years, by the way. Parkinson's still progresses, but that hadn't, and it does affect Renee's movements and especially her speech, but it did not stop her from going to a couple missions trips to the Kickapoo Friends Center in Oklahoma. And in 2013, she went on a trip to Guatemala. Eventually, it became too dangerous to live in a 2-story house in Chili, so 3 years ago, we bought a nice 1-level house in the Sandy Beach community on the south side of Long Lake across from Shad's campground. And we have now been blessed with 7 grandkids. There they are right there, the latest picture. Most of you know the 4 of them, Rugrats running around here. What I discovered while doing this talk is our life has been one miracle after another. And while they sing, think back at Renee's adventure in Alaska. What wilderness are you lost in? What miracle do you need? Are you, like Renee was, battered, bruised, and no longer have the strength to go on? God is waiting for you to ask for his help, and he will give you the strength to get home. Thank you.